Doug Casey is a longtime friend of Mark's, a former resident of Hong Kong, who came to global attention with books on living the life of an international man and again ensuring personal freedom despite the assaults that continue to grow on our ability to live a life of liberty. He also has written extensively on investment and related issues in a world where governments are constantly trying to chip away and take their share of what we earn and do. So we have a wonderful...
Thank you. Yeah, that was the first book I wrote, was called The International Man. I wrote that book in 1976, and one of its distinguishing things is it became the largest selling book in the history of Rhodesia, which is a record which will never be bettered. So, anyway, I agree 100% with absolutely everything that Mark said. I got to ask a question because I'd like to know who you guys are. Let me toss out some terms and just give me an idea and see if you identify yourself as believing in this. Socialist. Any socialists here? Any fascists here? Okay. Free marketeers? Any free marketeers here? Everybody? Okay. Any conservatives here? One conservative, couple. How about liberals, whatever that is? Any liberals? That's a good distinction. How about libertarians? Any libertarians here? Not everybody. How about anarchists? Any anarchists here? Okay. Any anarcho-capitalists here? Okay, these are a bunch of terms which are, every one of these terms is very inaccurately and loosely defined, and I would say that's part of the problem. My personal opinion is that we're in for a world of trouble over the next generation. Part of it is economic. I mean, I think that from a civilizational point of view, the Western world has been going downhill since about 1913. And all over the world, I think this curve is going parabolic. Things look better around the world because well, there are more scientists and engineers alive today than have lived in all of previous history put together. And of course, they're doing what scientists and engineers do, and that's one of the reasons why things seem like they're getting better. But it's not going to last forever, because the psychological attitude and economic views and political views of the world are deteriorating. And let me give you evidence of that. All over the world, governments are becoming more malignant. They're metastasizing, becoming far more repressive, and higher taxes, they're all bankrupt. And it's getting worse. They're supported by the people because everybody believes in democracy. Well, I've used a number of words here before. Liberal, conservative, democracy. Problem is that nobody knows what the hell these words mean. And that's one of the reasons why people like us, and I guess we're all kind of on the same wavelength. Everybody here believes in more freedom, more economic liberalism, we're kind of all of that general mindset. But we're losing the battle, I'm afraid. And there are many reasons why we're losing the battle. And the world is going to become worse, in my opinion, at least for a while, for another generation, till it collapses totally, maybe, and then we have to have a reset. Well, that's the problem with the reset. When they had the French Revolution in 1789, I would have cheered the downfall of Louis XVI. But then it got worse with Robespierre, and then it got worse again with Napoleon. And if I'd been in Russia in 1917, I would have cheered the downfall of Nicholas II. But then it got worse with Lenin, and it got much worse with Stalin. So the fact that the current system, as corrupt as it is, is going to go downhill and I think we're going to have a disaster, doesn't mean things are going to get better. They'll probably get even worse. Anyway, there are many reasons for this. No time to talk about it. But let me give you just a few reasons that relate a little bit to what Mark was saying. I want to talk about words. My favorite comedian is George Carlin. And if you've listened to any of his presentations, he was very big on actually defining words. And that's why he was so funny. But so just in the last few days, I put this list together. I thought I've never given this speech before. But so this is experimental. But let's take a few things about what we think we know that just aren't so. Words have become corrupted to mean things other than you think they mean. And this is a real problem, because if you don't use words accurately, you don't know if that word means one thing to you and something else to the other person. So it's impossible to communicate based on that. So I've got to put together a list of words that are conflated, confused, and misused. And this is just a random list that I'm not even going to have time to cover these things. But you listen to the news, and they talk about the U.S. did this, or the U.S. is sending soldiers someplace. Is that what they mean? The U.S., that's a geographical area of land with 50 states. It's not the U.S., it's the U.S. government. But people think the U.S. Oh, all the people that live in this bailiwick are doing it. But they're not. It's the U.S. government. So this creates confusion. They should say the U.S. government is sending soldiers to Iraq or 50 other places where they're doing it. But then there's even worse confusion on that, where they say America is doing this, America is doing that. Well, look, what is America? First of all, America is not a geographical location. America is an idea, and it was a very good idea, a unique idea. But America is dead, and it's been replaced by the U.S. Oh, wait a minute, the U.S. or the U.S. government? Anyway, people use this term, America, so that America does all these stupid things that are absolutely antithetical to the idea of America. They don't mean America. What they mean is the U.S. government. But they conflate it, and they corrupt the concept of America by conflating it with what the U.S. government does. I'll give you another one. In the U.S., we got nationalized health care of a variety recently. Oh, wait a minute, health care. Nobody thought about that. Did we really get health care? No. What is health care? Health is a condition of being that you personally are responsible for your own health. But the government says we're giving you health care. Oh, that's great. Everybody wants to be healthy. Give me health care. But they're not. They're giving you medical care. They're totally different. In fact, the more medical care that you get, the less healthy you probably are. Health is a strictly individual responsibility thing. Medical is like if your car breaks. You got the doctor to set your arm or give you a new heart valve or whatever they do. Do not conflate health care with medical care. It plays into their hands because the government says, I can give you health care. They can't. All they can do is force some doctor to give you medical care. So please be careful when you use those words. It plays into the hands of the socialists and other bad people. I'll give you another one. Oh, here's one. Right now, the war in the Ukraine. Everybody's heard about the war in the Ukraine. And they call it a civil war. Is it a civil war? That's often used on the news if you listen. No, it's not a civil war. What is a civil war? A civil war is where two opposing groups are fighting to conquer the government. They each want the government of the country. The Spanish Civil War was a real civil war. The civil war between Mao Zedong and Chiang Kai-shek, that was a civil war. They were fighting for the same government. What's going on in the Ukraine is not that. It's a war of secession, where the Donetsk provinces want to break off from the rest of the Ukraine. So they're not attacking the Ukraine, they're not fighting, they're not doing anything. They just want to be left alone. What Well, the American Civil War. That wasn't a civil war. It was a war of secession, same as the Ukrainian Civil War. All the South wanted, whether you think they were right or wrong with their social system, that's academic. They wanted to secede, but they weren't allowed to succeed, just like Donetsk probably won't be allowed to succeed from the Ukraine. I'm all for it. In fact, I want to see the number of state. I hate the state. The state is your enemy. I don't care if it's a state in America or Russia or Hong Kong or China. I don't care. The state is a criminal institution. It's your enemy. But still, even though I think it's an evil thing, I want to see the number of states double in the world next year, and double after that, and double after that, until we get about 7 billion states in the world. Okay? So that's the way I'm looking at it. So be careful when you say, when you let people say something is a civil war, or is it a war of secession, which is a very different thing. Give you another one. This relates to this too. Terrorism. Now, I've written a lot of financial books, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I've been there, done that. I don't want to waste time. I don't care about that stuff so much anymore. I'm writing a series of novels, politically incorrect novels, each one more politically incorrect than the next. I'll tell you about them because they're fun. First one's Speculator, where I talk about how you be a speculator, because everybody hates speculators. But I show our hero as he goes through this. He's actually a good guy, showing you're a good guy pursuing a noble occupation. So he's a speculator, successful, government steals all his money, he has to get into business, he becomes a drug lord. And I show how you become a drug lord and the morality of being a drug lord. And so our hero's a drug lord. Now, of course, the government steals his money from him, and this time they put him in jail. So he's pissed off, and he becomes an assassin. This can be a noble trade, and I show how you assassinate, who you assassinate, the psychology, the morality. But then he realizes that's like pulling shark's teeth. So it's pointless. So he moves it up, and he becomes terrorist. Now, terrorist, that's an evil person. No, terrorism is nothing but a method of warfare. It's like cavalry charges or artillery barrages. It's nothing but a method of warfare. There's nothing more or less bad than any of these other things with terrorism. Anyway, I don't want to waste time. He then becomes a warlord, where I show a warlord can be a good guy. And finally, where I do my thing on religion, he becomes the Antichrist, where I show the Antichrist has a bad reputation, unjustified, and the Antichrist is actually a hero and a good guy. Well, like Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost, who was a real hero and God was the criminal. Anyway. But let me talk about these words. I went off on a tangent. You remember the saying, nobody says this anymore, I'm a freedom fighter, you're a rebel, he's a terrorist. It's just your point of view, okay? And you have to be so careful where this is the latest thing, where everybody's a terrorist when they do something. I mean, you've got to confront these people. Look up the definitions of terrorism. Incidentally, the U.S. government in its various agencies and forums has over 100 different definitions of terrorism and what it is. So, anyway, hey, sometimes there's a time for terrorism. The only thing about terrorism I don't like is giving it a bad reputation is so often there are innocent bystanders who are hurt by this method of warfare. But there's innocent bystanders hurt in artillery barrages or all kinds of military operations. You want to minimize those things. Anyway, be careful with conflating being a rebel with the terrorist, with the freedom fighter. They can all be good things, actually. I'll give you another one. Here's a good one. Democracy. Everybody's pro-democracy. Everybody loves democracy. I mean, democracy is on a par with motherhood and, well, yeah, apple pie. Actually, democracy is incredibly stupid. I mean, maybe that's what Einstein was really talking about when he said that after hydrogen, the most common thing in the universe is stupidity. Because I don't believe in democracy. It was interesting when Lee Kuan Yew died the other night. He said if we had democracy in Singapore, Singapore wouldn't exist. And he's right, because democracy, what is it? It's really just mob rule. Mob rule dressed up in a coat and tie, perhaps. But that's all it is. It's where 51% of the people essentially get to tell the other 49% that they can go to concentration camps. So I'm anti-democracy. Do not let people toss it out as a positive value. It's just a method of political organization, and political organization itself is poison. So what you really want is freedom, which is totally different from democracy. It's got nothing to do, maybe accidentally sometimes. So be careful about these words, too, which are misused. What's another one? Oh, here's a good one. Communism, socialism, fascism, capitalism. These are actually the four economic systems that, well, basically Marx laid out. But nobody knows what they mean. Communism. Technically and theoretically, communism is an economic system where both the means of production, this is a Marxist breakdown I'm giving you, but it's an accurate one, where both the means of production and personal goods are owned in common by the state. Okay? That's communism. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Even in China, during the worst of the Mao era, it didn't exist. There's never been a communist state. There cannot be. Okay? That's just an ideal. Very bad one, but an ideal. Well, what's practical is socialism. What is socialism? Socialism, Marxist definition again, is one where the means of production, factories, fields, farms, are owned by the state or the people. Well, that's another thing. They conflate the state with the people. Totally different things. Everybody accepts it. It's ridiculous. Anyway, socialism, means of production owned by the state. Consumer goods owned by individuals. All right. So how many socialist countries are there in the world today? Means of production owned by the state. Okay. Even in China. North Korea. Well, I don't know. North Korea, you can own individual. You can own your toothbrush. You can own your clothes. China's not a socialist country. The means of production are owned, a lot of them, many of them, are owned by individuals now. Even China is not a socialist country. But they call themselves socialists. It's inaccurate. So what are they? What's the next step? Fascism. Everybody says fascism. And they think about Nazi Germany and, stormtroopers goose-stepping and, neat-looking tanks and stuff like that. No, that's got nothing to do with fascism. Fascism is, again, an economic system. What is fascism? It's an economic system where both the means of production and private goods are owned by individuals. But they're both controlled by the state. It's much more productive than socialism from an economic point of view. And almost every country in the world is technically fascist. But you can't say this to your typical group of chimpanzees out there because they'll say, no, that's not what fascism is. I know what I've seen movies. That's Germany in World War II, which was a perfect economically fascist state. Krupp and Farben, and those were all privately owned firms. The U.S., almost every place in the world is fascist today. Oh, and then there's one last thing, capitalism. Capitalism with both the means of production and consumer goods are privately owned and privately disposed of, totally, okay? Now, this is why I'm an anarchist. I don't believe that the state has a right to exist. I mean, it's a crazy myth that people have in their heads that because everybody's always believed in the state, they think that it's part of the cosmic firmament and it's necessary. It's not. And I'd say, because can anything evil really be necessary? Well, can anything necessary really be evil? The state's not necessary. I don't believe in it. I'm an anarcho-capitalist for that reason. What's another one here that might be interesting? Here's a good one. In the U.S., years ago, when I was in college, this used to be one of those sayings, and we used to say, hey, the U.S. will never have concentration camps. We'll call them something else. And everybody thought it was a joke, because nobody thought we'd really have concentration camps. Well, it turns out we don't have concentration camps, which weren't originated, incidentally, by the Germans. They were invented by the British in South Africa. Those were the first concentration camps, and they were just as bad as the Nazi concentration camps, but nobody talks about that. So what we now have are detention facilities. So, I think you should call things what they are. It's not maybe the Germans, if the Germans called them detention facilities, we'd call them concentration camps. You've got to be so careful with this. And this extends all over. I'm at the mining conference over at the Hyatt with Giant, and this misuse of words has insinuated itself everywhere. Like, for instance, I'm surprised at the ignorance of people in the financial business. Like, for instance, they talk about tons, and Americans are the worst. You've got ton, T-O-N, and ton, T-O-N-N-E. They're different. One's a short ton of pounds, and the other's a long ton of kilograms. And now, they don't talk about how many ounces of gold the central bank may own. They talk about how many tons of gold. Now, why would they do that? Because gold is priced in dollars per ounce. But nobody knows how many ounces are in a metric ton. And the reason I think they're doing this is because it confuses people. It makes gold seem more irrelevant and inconsequential, because nobody even knows what it's. If a government owns 133 tons of gold, some people think they're short tons. They really do. They don't know the difference between a long ton and a short ton. And nobody knows how many ounces are in a long ton, because it's not priced. Nobody uses gold by the ton. It becomes an academic thing. So this is happening everywhere. It's happened, look, with bonds. Everybody talks about the bond market. Well, it's actually not. There used to be a very well-known distinction between bonds and debentures. Bonds were debt securities issued by corporations that were backed by a specific asset, that you could take that asset. Now, all of these things are really debentures, which are unsecured bonds. It's just kind of guaranteed in general. Well, I find this is disturbing, that people don't know the difference and who owes who what. Anyway, it's academic. With $60 trillion worth of debt in the world today, you're going to find that nobody knows who owes who what or who's on first pretty soon. So, disturbing. Distinction between time deposits and demand deposits. This is not just an academic distinction you'd learn about in an economics course, because you don't learn about it in economic courses anymore. It's a critical distinction. A time deposit is one where you give your money to the bank, perhaps at 3%, and the bank finds a borrower that it lends to at 6%, capturing the 3% difference. But in classical banking times, before central banks, when they used to do that, they wouldn't make that loan for more than a year. It had to be self-liquidating, and it had to be co-signed, not by just some corporation, but by warm-bodied individuals who were. So it was low risk. So that was banking then. Now, banking is all about trading and everything. Oh, anyway, that's time deposits called savings accounts. Checking accounts or demand deposits are totally different. Totally different business. Checking accounts are ones where you pay the bank to store your money securely and give you the right to write checks against it, okay? For your convenience. You pay the bank for that. Today, these two accounts are totally conflated. And if, when you have a checking account, that money is sacrosanct. That gold, well, that's not money anymore. Because the way bankruptcies often occurred is the banker would see that checking account money mostly just sitting there being transferred between people and say, hey, we can make a lot of extra money if we lend that money out. There are a lot of people that want to borrow. We should help them, and we'll capture a full 6%, not just 3%. So these distinctions are lost. These types of accounts have become conflated. So it's corrupted people's thinking, not just corrupted the economic system. So there's all kinds of things. The difference between shareholders and stakeholders. I don't know where this bullshit thing, stakeholders, arrives. I mean, they're just people that are hangers-on that want something. They don't own the business. And as more attention is paid to these so-called stakeholders that arose out of nowhere about 30 years ago than is paid to the shareholders, who are viewed as a nuisance by management today. There's so many things. You know, you've got to be very, very careful about people that use the word we, especially when it's combined with the word should. We should do this. You know, I feel like Tonto and the Lone Ranger, where the two of them are surrounded by Indians, and the Lone Ranger says to Tonto, Tonto, we're in a lot of trouble. And Tonto says, what do you mean we, white man? So I don't like people that say we should. You want to do it, you should. But don't count me and the other people in the country or the world in on your stupid plan, because the only way the we is going to happen is if you hold a gun to somebody's head and make them do it. So be very careful about these people that use these words that way. Oh, another one is, I want to be fair. Let's do the fair thing, okay? Well, no, let's not do the fair thing, because this idea of fair is kind of a floating abstraction. I don't know what fair is. You know, he thinks this is fair. He thinks everybody's got a different idea of what fair is. I got an idea. Why don't we do the just thing? That's where everybody gets what they deserve. And there are certain ways of finding out what they deserve. It has nothing to do with fair. But nobody talks about what's just. People just talk about what's fair, whatever the hell that is. So there's more and more of this kind of stuff. And I could go on, because the society is so totally corrupt that you could... This piece of paper could go to the size of a dictionary. And it's why people are thoughtless, and their thoughts are corrupt, and they don't think. And it's why I don't like to talk with most people, because it's annoying and pointless. So, but not you guys. I'm sure that you guys are all, if I asked you to identify yourselves again, you'd all identify yourselves as anarcho-capitalist libertarians at this point, now that you know the difference. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm sure both speakers would be pleased to field questions now.
Question for Doug. Doug, when I was growing up in India, and maybe this was a leftover from the English rule, there was a culture to discourage those who were uneducable to be educated. And I sometimes wonder if that was a good... I sometimes think that was probably a good thing to do, because there are certain kind of people who cannot be educated. They probably should not be educated, because by going through so-called education, they confuse and dilute the concept of education. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I totally agree, Giant. I think that this thing about let's give every kid a college education. Well, at whose expense to start with, and is it a good idea? Does it do any good? And anyway, I went to college in the 60s, and even then, it was all about chasing girls and drinking beer and having fun. It had nothing to do with actually learning things. So I consider encouraging kids to go to college to be idiotic. It's a misallocation in 90% of cases of 4 valuable years of time and a huge amount of capital. So I totally agree.
Doug, I want to know who in the United States came up with the word progressive. We have a very destructive taxation system in Australia, which is called the progressive rate of taxation. Americans proudly declare themselves as progressives.
Yes.
And they are destructives. How did they get away with that?
I believe the word progressive, I may be incorrect, but I believe it was, if not created, at least popularized by Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, who's very interesting as an individual or a guy to go hunting and fishing and drinking with. I would have loved Teddy Roosevelt, but he was in the political arena. He was a criminal, and he was the first really progressive president that the U.S. had. But everybody thinks he's great. He's on Mount Rushmore, which is an idiot. I mean, if I was president of the U.S., I'd dynamite that goddamn thing.
Question for Mark. And obviously you know Hong Kong as well as many of us, if not better. As you described Hong Kong in the 80s, it was one where the parental push was to be independent, the economic push was to be independent, so that the culture of the city supported all of that. Why did it go wrong? Because now it's become a clone of Western Europe, with people looking for dependence, seeking to be dependent, and pleading with the government to make them more dependent, whereas the financial secretary at least is one person who probably doesn't want that to happen. So where did that come from? There weren't, I can't think of any internal role models. Is it a question of infection from West European ways of thinking that got taken up here?
I think if you go back to the 80s, well, let me put it this way, when I had my business here, it was really hard to get talented people that work, except for brief periods of time. Everybody wanted to start doing business. I had a great guy, Thomas Mock, who was a designer, and he did great work, and he worked 100 hours a year with me a year. Then he went out and started really successful recently. I don't know where he is now. So that was a problem that I, as an employer, faced in Hong Kong. Yeah, I don't know what it is like today. But see, what you had, if you look at the Hong Kong culture of Hong Kong back then, first of all, the situation you had, economic environment was totally conducive to independence because there was no welfare, there was no assistance, except privately. Okay? Secondly, you had all these, you had the touch-base policy. So anyone who crossed the border from China and touched base, or even earlier, just crossed the border, became a resident of Hong Kong. And the people who had the courage or gumption to escape communist China were the kind of people who were right for Hong Kong. Would fit right in. They were enterprising, just like most immigrants are, enterprising and energetic. It's just, they used to call it a brain drain in England, right? They're all the people, enterprising, brainy people leaving the country, and all the dumb schmucks staying at home. Right? So of course now that immigration in Hong Kong is gone. You've had well, I can put it. So Murray Mannkal once told me this. He said, somebody had asked him who should be the next governor of Hong Kong. And this was not after him, but after the next governor. He said, I don't know who should be the next governor, so I tell you it shouldn't. It shouldn't be someone from the diplomatic corps, and it shouldn't be someone who speaks Mandarin. It shouldn't be someone who spent time in China. And of course that was, his name started with a Y. You. Whatever you. All those three things. And that's kind of when it started. But basically, I mean, the thing what made Hong Kong what it was the fact that it could not be independent, right? Because of the late 1997 list. There was never any movement towards democracy, to self-rule, to any of these things. The Legislative Council was impotent. And so there was no movement like there was in the rest of the British Commonwealth to independent political system. And that was the great virtue of Hong Kong. Hong Kong was an oligarchy in terms of political rule, but it had no, the colonial office, that was the other thing that changed. The colonial office attitude was, we're defending the colony against Britain. And then the colonial office was absorbed into the diplomatic corps, where we're here to further Britain's interests. Different attitudes. And basically the advance of the international, it's like Wilson's when I say the world for democracy, was in 1917. And since then democracy has become a symbol of not liberty. So you've had this cultural change, which, Hong Kong, still imported British people into the government, because they came with British ideas, socialist tendencies. They just had to start with real low base at the time. They had all confluence of factors. That was pretty much
Hi, question for Doug. First of all, thank you for the very lighthearted talk. It's very amusing. My question was, you mentioned that we libertarians are losing the fight. In your opinion, what should we be doing to help, get ahead? How do we win this fight?
Well, very good. Well, it's, first of all, I'm a believer in that French phrase, sauve qui peut. Let he who can save himself. And that's important. Well, you want to become rich. Not necessarily as rich as Soros and those people, because it's time to eat the rich. Because so many of the rich people in the world today have stolen money. They've gotten rich the way African dictators get rich. They've used the state to steal from everybody else. Even productive people are being tarred with that brush. So I think it might be dangerous to be rich. So what do you do? I don't know. I'd like to get off this planet, and if I'm reincarnated, I promise you I'm not coming back here, because it's I don't know the answer to that question. I do what I do. I can only tell you what I do. And what I do is I say these things not because, well, it amuses me. I don't think I'm going to, if somebody listens to something I say or reads a book I wrote or something, maybe 1 out of 100 or 2 out of 100 will say, oh, I never thought of it that before. And that's good karma. I do believe in karma, actually. I think it's a real thing. What comes around goes around. So I do it for that reason, and to amuse myself, but not because I think we can change anything or save the world. I don't think that's possible. The world's got a life of its own, and to hell with it.
Any questions down that end of the table that I might have missed?
Mark defined himself as an independent anarchist or anarchistic independent, right? And you are an anarchistic capitalist or
Anarcho-capitalist, right?
You haven't explained to us what you mean by anarchist. For example, your capitalistic system would not work in any really anarchic society. You need laws and you need rules, otherwise a contract has no enforceability.
Right, all right.
Unless you start using your Nazi card.
I understand. Let me.
Similarly with you.
Mark can answer that. I mean, I can answer it.
I thought you have limitations, because stirring up people to murder and cause jihads and so on ought not to be allowed, even in your free speech society. So there's got to be limitations.
Well, the only way you can have a limitation is to initiate force. With a gun.
What about laws?
What are laws? Originally agreements between people. Right? Not counting what the government makes a law. When the government makes a law, it's coming with a gun to enforce it. Now, the fact of the matter is, we live most of our lives in a state of anarchy, as I define it. That is free market anarchy. I'm not talking about anarchy comes in a variety of meanings, like always in English language. It means chaos in the absence of government. But one of the meanings is a society without government that works. And there are all kinds of anarchists. Like, I remember a time in Sydney, there was a bunch of us libertarians, there was this anarchist society at Sydney University. We went to visit them. They're all leftist anarchists. And one of us said to him, one of the guys said to them, well, you know, if you lived on this side of the hill and we lived on the other side of the hill, and the other guy, one of the other guys jumped up and said, you better come and beat the shit out of you. And so they're the leftist anarchists, which is what most people think of when they talk about anarchists, people with bombs. What I would say is we live our life in a state of anarchy. Right? You go out, you walk out down the street down to Central, are there any policemen around? You stand up, like this happened in the Excelsior Hotel. A guy called Jerome Smith, who was another one like me, and was being interviewed by a bunch of reporters in his hotel room. He was just giving a speech, and he came up, and somebody asked him the same sort of question. He said, look out the window, look down on the street. See all those people walking along the street? And there are a whole lot of people walking along the streets in Hong Kong, right? And they're pretty narrow. He said, look, they're not bumping into each other. That's anarchy. As a general rule, we live our lives in a state where we don't call policemen. We have a problem, somebody bumps into you in the street, oh sorry, or maybe you take action yourself if he's got a knife. Okay? And most times the police come after you after the event. They don't come before the event. You want someone before the event to prevent a crime. Before it happens, you have to hire a bodyguard, you have to put bars on the windows and put in alarms in your house, right? So we live day to day as that. We can go our whole lives and never see a policeman without going through any problems. In a society, and no society will work where it doesn't have a cultural belief system behind it. So a society based on where everybody basically agrees that all transactions are between consenting adults and nobody else needs to get involved, especially not the government, which doesn't need to be around. A state of anarchy will work, this kind of anarchy will work if the majority of people, this is the primary cultural belief. If you institute a situation of anarchy in Iraq, or Afghanistan, or for that matter the United States today, they'll collapse in no time at all, because that is not the cultural belief. You get the government you deserve is true in the sense of the plural view, not the singular view. You get the government that is consonant with the cultural belief system of the country. The cultural belief system of the country, so there's a division within the libertarian movement towards the anarchist. There should be a limited government, cannot initiate force just to enforce contracts, and the anarchist. Now, if in either case you have the same cultural, it's an irrelevant argument, because you have the same cultural background supports both systems. And once you have the cultural background to support the minarchist system, then it's only a matter of time before that government disappears entirely. It will literally wither away. To get there, you have to have a society with that cultural belief system. And that's the real challenge. I don't have an answer to that either.
We had a question down there. Could you take it to the gentleman in blue?
Just a short thing about Doug talking about words, misuse, and how we torture words. A question of mine would be, is there somebody from the press here at this table? What would the press say about these words? No one.
A few of us.
Yeah, there are a few of us who do work in the press, but I'll give you the short question for the line of anyways.
Also, a cup of coffee with cream.
What Doug said about the precise use of language is exactly, in fact, I'm sure all the interns seated here today have heard me say it over and over again with massive message discipline. Simon, also one of our co-founders, also stressed that the battle in getting the words back to army, say for example the word liberal, have to be, or the word liberty and justice and all these things. So we have to first fight them on the battlefield of words definition, and to stop them hijacking these words and to spin. So whenever I catch my interns, or indeed any of our speakers who represents us outside, whenever they use their word, I will stop them. So healthcare and medical care would be a prime example of what I would get for as our representatives. But it is absolutely essential that the sly way that language is used to support or destroy cause. And the press members, although a lot of the journalists claim to be independent and impartial, but they're advancing their agenda. While a lot of us who also write in the media are transparently biased, which I think is the only way to go. So we are honest about our intentions to further a particular cause, and then we don't have to hide our intentions. Well, a lot of journalists do that. But I'll pass the mic to the proprietor of a newspaper who also is a co-founder of the Mannkal Institute.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to add a little quick one to that. Here's one you might want to pick up on that we coined a few years ago. You know, in kind of concordant with the rise of stakeholders, was this term NGOs. And we looked around, particularly in Hong Kong, well, particularly in social responsibility, but particularly in Hong Kong, when you look at these things that call themselves NGOs, in Hong Kong is almost unique in that 70% of them get the massive, usually over 80% of their budget from the government, and their budgets have to, they're planned for the year, every year has to be approved by the government. And so we stopped calling them NGOs, and we started using the term GFOs, government-funded organizations, and it makes all the difference. So add that one to your lexicon.
Which of course reminds me to remind you all that in the Mannkal Institute's founding charter, we've written in our founding charter not to take government money. In fact, we were offered government money about 6 or 7 years ago. Quite a substantial amount, actually, because they wanted to buy us. But I remember we were eating on the way up the hill, and I think Simon was with me. Just next door. Just next door, right, in a way. And then I remember having to put my fork and knife down, look at the professor from the Central Policy Unit from the government. I swallowed very hard, and I had to tell him, sorry, it is in our founding charter that we can't take government money. And from that moment onwards, the government realized that these guys are, for lack of a better word, jihadists. Oh, there is a better word, crusaders. Hey, Western audience. So therefore, we would really appreciate if you can help fund and further our course.
And obviously, in the interests of doing that, often in Chinese, the words that we use don't have an exact analogy yet anyway, so it's an open to in Chinese to find the words in a more appropriate way. And if we can, Hong Kong and the world will be a better place. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Thank you to our speakers, Mark and Doug, for your insights, humour, and I hope you did find it enjoyable, and I hope everyone else did as well. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you again at our next event.